This is something that I think is so important. The whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, and I have to say, in a way, the American right kind of made this monster and it's now sort of attacking them, where it became like every person who ever talked to Jeffrey Epstein, who ever met Jeffrey Epstein, somehow had suspicion on them that they were a pedophile or had an interest in.
This is no longer damage control. It is a counterstrike collapsing in real time. Everyone once believed this empire was untouchable, polished, insulated by money, silence, and influence until the response exposed more than the leak itself. What has surfaced is not a denial but a reaction. A sudden legal push, posts disappearing, major outlets going quiet, and one rival deciding to press harder instead of backing off. All of it is unfolding publicly and fast. Within hours of the Epstein file release, Jay-Z's name spreads through an FBI intake record tied to a 1996 Florida property. Almost immediately, 50 Cent posts that he wants to produce a documentary, then escalates after warnings allegedly surface. Soon after, rumors circulate that Jay-Z has left the country. Meanwhile, Beyoncé's follower count reportedly drops by millions, and the silence from their usual media allies becomes absolute. None of this aligns with a story that is supposed to be harmless. The timing feels off, the reactions appear overly coordinated, and the retreat is too visible. Whatever mechanism is activating here feels older, heavier, and already moving toward consequences that no public statement can stop.
So first, I think we just have to say, and you set it up well, there are two real storylines here. One is what is in these files that we can see and that we can actually learn. We're going to get on that first. There's also the story about what is not in these files or what is heavily redacted, because that is also sparking.
The response inside the Carter Circle hardens almost immediately, and that reaction becomes the story itself. As the Epstein files circulate, sources close to the situation claim the priority is not clarification but containment. The signs appear quickly. Posts referencing the file begin disappearing. Gossip accounts suddenly go silent. Major outlets that usually rush toward controversy hesitate or avoid the topic entirely. At the same time, messages begin moving through legal channels rather than public ones. The name most frequently associated with that pressure is Beyoncé's. Industry insiders describe a familiar strategy: suppress the spread, starve the oxygen, and remind people where their access comes from. This approach contrasts sharply with how an innocent misunderstanding is typically handled. The silence does not feel calm, it feels coordinated. That coordination becomes impossible to ignore when it collides with someone who has no intention of staying quiet. The collision becomes public on January 31st when 50 Cent posts a blunt reaction to Jay-Z's name appearing in Epstein-related material, writing, "Dan, they got your man Jay in the Epstein files. I gotta do a doc on this stuff." The message reads less like curiosity and more like provocation. Within hours, memes appear. Then AI-generated imagery. Then mocking captions that suggest he knows exactly which nerves he is striking. Sources close to him say the tone shifts after alleged legal warnings surface. Not softer, but sharper. Instead of backing down, he escalates, teasing exposure and daring anyone to stop him. In an industry conditioned to respond to threats with compliance, his refusal alone becomes disruptive. The quiet surface explanation claims that Jay-Z's name appears only in an unverified FBI intake record logged in July 2019, tied to an alleged incident at a Florida property in 1996. Supposedly, that is where the story ends. No charges, no follow-up, no confirmation. Yet the reactions do not align with that narrative. Jay-Z does not issue a denial. He does not send representatives into the press cycle. Instead, reports begin circulating that he leaves the United States entirely, a move sources close to the couple describe as temporary, but never fully explain. At the same time, analytics accounts claim Beyoncé's social media following drops by millions within days, a visible sign of public unease that her team does not address. These are not the actions of people confident that the story will fade on its own.
So what happens now is this is simply a civil complaint. And in a civil complaint, it goes through the technical legal process. Now, the distinction, Jessica, between civil and criminal, of course, is that civil is for monetary damages, right? The system can only reward you with money. There's allegations that this 13-year-old is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, suffered depression, etc. So now you go to fact find.
This is where the story begins to bend. If the mention is meaningless, why does it trigger such aggressive suppression? If the intake record is unreliable, why not confront it directly? Insiders note that Beyoncé has spent years constructing an image built on control, precision, and absolute authority over her brand. This moment appears to test that machinery. Legal pressure replaces public reassurance. Silence replaces explanation. Spokespeople who usually speak for the Carters suddenly become unreachable. Even longtime allies appear hesitant, as though waiting for direction. The vacuum invites speculation, the very outcome a containment strategy is meant to prevent. Instead, speculation grows. What fuels that growth is the contrast between who remains silent and who does not. 50 Cent continues posting. He references his recent documentary success dismantling another powerful figure, reminding audiences that he knows how to transform allegations into content and attention. He jokes about smelling beef and popcorn, framing the situation as entertainment while signaling that he is not intimidated. Industry veterans argue this is not random trolling, it is strategic pressure. By refusing to let the conversation fade, he forces the Carters' response, or lack of one, into sharper focus. Every hour without a statement makes the insinuations feel heavier. The media landscape intensifies the tension. Fans begin noticing that outlets known for breaking celebrity scandals avoid the story or quietly remove mentions. Screenshots circulate showing posts deleted without explanation. Gradually, people begin asking whether this is coincidence or influence. Beyoncé's name resurfaces repeatedly, not as a subject of the allegation, but as someone perceived to have the leverage to make stories disappear. That perception alone shifts the narrative. The question stops being what allegedly happened in 1996. The focus becomes what is happening now and who is controlling it.
If we get to the bottom of Tupac's when that is finally revealed, 15 other will be revealed with it. And you will find that they were all committed by the same two people, father and son.
As days pass, the rumor that Jay-Z is abroad begins to solidify into accepted fact across online circles, even though no official confirmation emerges. People close to the couple insist the trip is precautionary, yet they cannot explain why precaution is necessary. Others quietly suggest that leaving the country provides time for lawyers to work behind the scenes. None of these explanations fully address why the couple has not issued a direct denial. The lack of clarity fuels darker interpretations, that responding publicly could open doors better left closed. Within this context, Beyoncé's role begins to appear less like protection and more like command, directing a strategic shutdown while hoping the storm eventually passes. By now, the original allegation almost feels secondary to the behavior surrounding it. A single intake record leads to legal warnings, widespread silence, social media backlash, and a rival openly daring the empire to respond. Each element alone might be dismissed, but together they form a pattern that refuses to settle. The more the Carters retreat inward, the more space they create for outsiders to shape the narrative. As 50 Cent continues to provoke that space, the central question shifts. It is no longer whether the situation will escalate, but how much pressure the system can absorb before something breaks. What begins to surface is the realization that this moment does not exist in isolation. Industry insiders start connecting events to the past rather than focusing solely on the present. Jeffrey Epstein's shadow lingers over the situation, not because of a single file, but because of what his network symbolized. Powerful figures operating within private spaces, accusations treated as administrative obstacles, and reputations preserved through silence and influence. Sources within the industry note that the playbook unfolding around the Carters appears familiar to anyone who has observed similar crises. When proximity becomes risky, the priority often shifts toward minimizing exposure rather than addressing the substance of the claims. This instinct reframes the current reaction as learned behavior rather than sudden panic. The deeper implication suggests that this may not be the first time such defenses have been tested, only the first time someone with nothing to lose continues, pushing from outside the system.
But what I've gathered from your articles, this seems to be a global network that Epstein was a part of. And I believe there are multiple Epsteins. Like, I don't believe that Jeffrey Epstein was the head of the snake. Yeah. Like, you know, they never go after the head of the snake. They never go after
the head of the snake, quote unquote, are just, it's the billionaire class. And so there's a faction of these billionaires in our oligarchy. And of course, the American oligarchy, you know, the American oligarchs don't necessarily, a lot of them don't have an allegiance necessarily to the United States.
As public attention widens, older stories that once existed only on the margins begin resurfacing. For years, whispers circulated about exclusive gatherings that left some guests unsettled environments where power dynamics allegedly felt unusual, and scenes that never aligned with the couple's carefully polished public image. Individually, these rumors never gained traction. They lingered quietly, often dismissed as resentment or fantasy. Now, with scrutiny returning to the Carter orbit, those stories no longer float independently. Instead, they begin clustering together. Industry veterans suggest that when unrelated individuals describe similar discomfort, the instinct is not necessarily to confirm accusations, but to question why identical themes continue resurfacing. Within this context, today's silence appears less like dignity and more like strategy. Beyoncé's professional history becomes difficult to separate from that strategy. Some former collaborators have previously accused her of exerting extreme control beyond contracts and choreography, alleging manipulation, intimidation, and practices they described as emotionally or spiritually unsettling. At the time, those claims were largely dismissed as jealousy or instability. Now, some observers reinterpret them as early warnings about how power may operate within her inner circle. People close to Beyoncé insist she believes absolute control equals protection, and that belief allegedly shapes every decision when her brand faces a threat. Viewed through that lens, the current suppression effort appears less reactionary and more consistent with how she has historically handled perceived challenges, tightening the perimeter and trusting that silence will outlast controversy. Under that pressure, the marriage between Beyoncé and Jay-Z begins to appear differently to critics. What has long been marketed as a partnership built on loyalty and shared success now reads, to skeptics, as something closer to a mutually assured defense pact. Industry insiders speculate that separation could be risky, not because of emotional fallout, but because of potential exposure. Remaining together allows them to maintain control over their shared narrative. A split, however, could fracture that control and invite questions neither side wants answered. This interpretation spreads rapidly across online communities, fueling speculation that divorce is not simply unlikely, but potentially impossible. Every public appearance, or absence, becomes evidence within a growing theory that their relationship functions more as insulation than romance.
There's a lot of people, 50, I feel like he don't have to say nothing, but 50's crazy. He's been like this his whole life. When he's on the block, 50's coming.
Meanwhile, the figure who refuses to play by these unwritten rules continues circling the situation. 50 Cent's role begins shifting in public perception, from internet troll to pressure test. People who have worked with him describe his sharp instinct for identifying fear and recognizing when a reaction signals vulnerability. His history of turning conflict into leverage makes his persistence appear calculated rather than impulsive. Importantly, 50 Cent is not making direct allegations. Instead, he is daring a response. By doing so, he exposes how restricted his targets may actually be. Each time he posts, the lack of pushback from Beyoncé and Jay-Z reinforces the perception that they are boxed in by their own silence. The broader industry watches closely because the implications extend far beyond one couple. Executives, artists, and power brokers recognize familiar patterns and quietly evaluate their own exposure. If a figure as influential as Jay-Z must be treated with such caution, others begin questioning where they stand. The Epstein files become less about individual accusations and more about the reminder that proximity to that world carries lasting risk. Being mentioned, even indirectly, forces decisions that may reveal how concerned someone is about what else could surface. That fear spreads quickly, reshaping alliances, silencing commentary, and turning curiosity into compliance.
Dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically two for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President.
Soon, another rumor begins circulating, one too detailed to dismiss and too widespread to ignore. Industry insiders begin quietly suggesting that Jay-Z is not an exception, but rather a prototype. The conversation shifts away from fame, music, or commercial success and toward access, proximity, and protection. Executives, financiers, entertainment power brokers, and cultural gatekeepers are rumored to operate within the same social ecosystem, attending the same private gatherings and adhering to the same unwritten rules. These individuals rarely appear on stage or red carpets, yet their influence quietly shapes careers, media coverage, and industry direction. According to these whispers, the growing panic is not about one prominent name surfacing, but about the fear that a single crack could expose a much larger network of relationships that has never faced meaningful public scrutiny.
Family out tonight. It's a family affair. I saw your mother-in-law so proud of.
Industry sources describe a noticeable behavioral shift among influential figures in recent weeks. Travel plans are quietly altered. Assistants are instructed to screen communications more aggressively. Digital footprints shrink overnight as older posts, photos, and associations are either deleted or locked behind privacy controls. Lawyers increasingly become the first point of contact instead of publicists. Observers describe the pattern as less coincidence and more coordinated retreat. According to individuals familiar with these circles, the concern is not simply exposure, it is sequence. If one individual loses institutional protection and begins cooperating with federal authorities, the resulting domino effect could prove devastating. The anxiety, insiders say, is less about guilt or innocence and more about proximity and documentation that was never intended for public view. What makes these rumors gain traction is how closely they mirror current behavior patterns. Silence begins spreading across unrelated sectors of entertainment, finance, and even politics. Public commentary slows dramatically. Invitations disappear. Individuals known for projecting confidence suddenly avoid any indirect association with controversy. The instinct becomes neither defense nor denial but disappearance. Observers note this is how powerful networks often behave when attention itself is perceived as dangerous. Not necessarily because every member has something to conceal, but because no one knows who might decide that survival requires cooperation. Within such an environment, loyalty weakens and fear becomes a form of currency.
What do they stand to gain from it? I don't think anyone really knows at this point because it's very, we have to be kind of speculative here because we're not going to get like an admission from the Trump administration about what they're actually thinking. They're obviously worried about PR and optics, and they have continued for months to kick this can down the road and try and make.
There is also increasing speculation that authorities may be aware of these internal dynamics and are choosing patience over immediate action, allowing pressure to build while monitoring who reacts first. Sources claim the greatest threat may not be subpoenas, but isolation. Once an individual senses they have been abandoned by the network that once protected them, the incentive structure changes dramatically. Silence begins to feel risky rather than loyal, while cooperation can appear as self-preservation. That possibility alone is enough to keep entire rooms silent, entire industries cautious, and numerous careers temporarily frozen. Within this framework, the situation involving Jay-Z begins to feel symbolic rather than personal. His rumored absence, the aggressive containment efforts, and the refusal to engage publicly appear less like private decisions and more like signals directed toward others within the same power structure, a warning not to speak, speculate, or attract attention. The fear is that if even one influential figure miscalculates, the illusion separating individual scandal from systemic exposure could collapse. Once that boundary disappears, controlling who becomes implicated next may prove impossible. What unsettles observers most is how normalized this atmosphere of fear already appears. Industry conversations reportedly occur in coded language and hypothetical scenarios, as if participants understand the risks without openly stating them. The suggestion that there may be hundreds like him is not meant literally, but structurally. Individuals who benefit from the same silence, the same avoidance of documentation, and the same expectation that serious misconduct never fully surfaces. Recent anxiety suggests that expectation may be weakening. For many insiders, that possibility feels more threatening than any single allegation. Meanwhile, public curiosity continues growing. Social media platforms analyze follower losses, travel rumors, and unexplained absences. Supporters argue the scrutiny is unfair, while critics claim it is overdue. Neither side can fully explain why restraint appears so aggressive or why protection seems to require such extensive coordination. As questions remain unanswered, speculation gradually solidifies into belief. In this environment, perception begins moving faster than verified facts.
Sometimes you receive more with not doing well than you receive. If I threw an excellent pitch.
We wouldn't even bring it up.
What makes this moment especially volatile is the collision between control and chaos unfolding in real time. Beyoncé's apparent instinct is to seal off communication, wait out the controversy, and rely on influence and public fatigue. 50 Cent's instinct is the opposite, to continue applying pressure until something breaks. Jay-Z's perceived response appears to center on withdrawal and physical distance, minimizing visibility while the situation evolves. These instincts clash rather than align, generating friction that intensifies public attention far more than any single allegation could. Sources close to the situation suggest the greatest fear is not what is currently known, but what might be forced into public view if the standoff continues. At this stage, the situation feels less like a conventional scandal and more like a structural fracture spreading across an entire industry ecosystem. Old rumors, emerging leaks, strategic silence, and public provocation are all feeding the same unresolved tension. Nothing definitive has occurred, yet everything feels unstable. This instability raises questions that refuse to disappear. Is the silence a display of confidence or containment? Is the marriage between Beyoncé and Jay-Z a partnership or a protective alliance? Is 50 Cent bluffing or waiting for the precise moment to escalate? And if this is how power responds to being mentioned, what does that reveal about what it fears most? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments. Choose a side or challenge them all. This story continues evolving, and whatever comes next is unlikely to unfold quietly